All right, folks, I'd like to do a type of video that I've never done before. I'm going to do a trip report of one of my recent drug experiments. One of the reasons I got pushed out of academia or decided to leave academia, however you want to describe it, is because I've always been a fan of careful, considered, experimental drug use, especially for intellectual production purposes. And it turns out that you're not actually allowed to do that as an academic. Turn my phone off. You can get in a lot of trouble as an academic if you talk honestly and openly about doing drugs. So that was kind of a deal breaker for me. And so I figured I might as well make the most out of it if I'm free from academic institutions. Now I'm not only going to continue doing careful, considered, drug-based intellectual experiments, but I might as well talk all the more openly about it and delve deeper into my reflections and experiences. Try to tease out what I think are the best drugs and the best doses and the best contexts for whether it be creative work or focused, heavier forms of writing or whatever the case might be. So I recently took a very small dose, what we would call a microdose, of 1P-LSD. And that is different than normal LSD. It's what they call an analog. So it's molecularly very similar, but slightly different. So this means that it has more kind of legal leeway. It's easier to get. And in different jurisdictions, it's arguably not illegal, depending on where you are. So that's one of the reasons that they make these analog versions of different drugs. Now, obviously, I'm not endorsing that you should do it because I don't know where you are. I don't know what the legality is. I don't know what your physical needs are. So this is not, I just want to say very frankly up front, I'm not telling people to go do this. I'm not a doctor. Well, I am a doctor, like a PhD, but I'm not that kind of doctor. And so this is not advice for anyone. Take this information with many grains of salt, but you might find it useful in some way. It's just my personal experience. So I took a microdose of 1P-LSD, which is very similar to LSD, but it's not the same thing. And in my experience, this is the only time I ever took it. The first thing I would say about it is it's definitely, I think, more mellow than normal LSD. And that is cool, I think. I appreciate that. LSD is a very heavy experience. It's very taxing on the mind and body. You have to recover from it for quite some time. But the small dose of 1P-LSD that I took was very, very simple. It was more short-lived than LSD. I only really felt it. I actually felt it for most of the day. I took it early in the morning, right when I woke up around 9 a.m. And I did feel it for most of the day, but it really starts to taper off for me anyway. It noticeably tapered off around probably the 6-hour mark, I think. But it gradually decreased in its effect on me. But here's the thing. So a few details about how I did it. It was on my birthday, so my roommates were very kind and they treated me to a trip to the flotation tank. And so I did it like an hour before I got into the flotation tank. And it was awesome, I have to say. This was a killer combination. When I'm in the flotation tank on this microdose of 1P-LSD, did I say how much, by the way? It was 20 micrograms. And that's different than 20 micrograms of LSD. So it's not immediately or directly comparable in terms of the dosages there, just so you know. And basically, when I first got into the flotation tank, for the first like 15, 20 minutes, I was kind of like, oh, I'm not really feeling anything. Maybe I didn't take enough. And then what I noticed by the end of the 60-minute float was that at around the 45-minute mark, I think I started to feel this gradually increasing sense of energy, and energy is a corny word, but it was like motivation is what I would call it. And this kind of enthusiasm. And I started thinking about my projects that I'm currently in the middle of and what I'm working on. And I started just feeling really sort of pregnant with power, kind of. I felt like my will to power brewing inside of me. And it was like slowly increasing so that by the time the float was over, like right before the float was over, it's kind of perfect timing. I was almost kind of getting antsy. Like I wanted to get out and I wanted to, attack the day and do stuff. And so it ended right when I was like getting really, really pumped up to get up and get out. and get on with the day. And so that was cool. And that was definitely drug induced. Like it was a level of kind of very wide-eyed, open-minded excitement and energy that definitely was not normal. And I've done flotations before, so it wasn't just that. I can discriminate between the drug-induced part of it. And so that was a really, really cool combination. And I just came out of the flotation tank feeling basically like amazing. Like my mood was just really high all day. And that's basically all that happened. Honestly, it was, I never saw any visuals. I didn't have any of the typical telltale, symptoms of an acid trip, which is cool. I like that. I mean, it's fun to do every now and then, a proper acid trip, but it's very intense and sometimes, quite difficult and almost scary or whatever. It's just taxing. It's heavy. It's worth it often. It can be a great thing, but I really like microdosing LSD. And this is my first time microdosing 1P-LSD, and it was even more subtle. So I really enjoyed that. I went out for lunch with my friends and wife, and here's another thing I'll note that was kind of interesting. I felt very mentally clear the whole day. I had no problem talking, being social and jovial and, dynamic, public and private social contexts. I was very perfectly normal in terms of my fluidity and ability to think and speak for the most part. But I did have a moment where I wanted to go into private and do some writing. So I was like, I should jot down some of the thoughts I'm having and try to turn some of this into something written. And that was hard. I actually was unable to do that very well. And I'm usually pretty good at writing on drugs. It's usually not a problem for me. And this time, not much was coming out. I did not get much on paper. And that was kind of an interesting thing to know. It's sort of like when I had the problem that when I sat down, the thoughts that I thought were interesting, when I tried to put them into words on paper, there just wasn't really anything interesting to say, or I didn't feel like expounding on it or something like that. I think it was one of those things where I felt so good, like my mood was so high, my happiness was very high, that I didn't even feel like writing. Like, why write? And I think it kind of speaks to this ancient wisdom, which a lot of people have articulated, that in some level, writing is a expression or symptom of dissatisfaction with life. People write because there's something wrong. There's some itch they need to scratch, or there's just some basic source of frustration or dissatisfaction in life itself that makes us want to turn to the written page and live vicariously in some sense through the written word. And I think, so in other words, 1P-LSD, in my case at least, was not conducive to writing, because I think in part it just made me feel so good. My mood was so high that I just had no need to write. I didn't feel like formulating any thoughts or developing them in written words. Now, I want to distinguish between what I would call mood and euphoria. It wasn't, I guess it was somewhat euphoric, but I want to distinguish because I think that certain drugs can lift your mood in a way that's a kind of more durable, more subtle, more gradual, and ultimately kind of more healthy way than what I would call euphoria, which is, I think of euphoria as more acute, more short-lived, more synthetic and kind of chemically based. Whereas other drugs can actually induce positive affect in a more general way that's not so, localized and specific to the particular kind of chemicals in your body at that moment. And so, for instance, if you take a lot of Adderall, for instance, you can feel euphoric. You get really kind of amped up and pumped up, but it's short-lived. It goes away once the Adderall goes away. And it's also very kind of antsy. And you while you're euphoric, you have a sense that you just took too much Adderall, and that's what's going on. But what was cool about 1P-LSD was it wasn't acute like that. It didn't feel like a particularly chemical intoxication. It just made me feel more positive about the various things in my life. I felt good about the kind of long run trajectory that my various projects and life paths were on. And I just felt confident, motivated, energized, And it was a more diffuse, healthy feeling kind of optimism or positive affect. And here's the thing, I'm not kidding. This is the biggest thing I want to report about this one experiment with 1P-LSD. I kid you not, the motivation effect, the kind of positive affect that it gave me lasted for about 1 week at least. And I saw this in my productivity figures for the week after. Like, I track all of my work, like how how many hours I work each week. I track it pretty carefully. Every time I do focused work of any kind, I hit the clock and I have a little description of what I'm doing. So I have a sense of what my average amount of work hours is, like how many hours I'm able to do focused, high value work. And the week after I did the 1P-LSD and the flotation tank, it was my average for the week was higher. I'm sorry, my numbers of hours worked on focused, high quality work was notably higher than my average for the few weeks before. Maybe I'll find some time to actually run the numbers and do some little statistical analysis or something like that. But I can tell you just from looking at it, it was clear and noticeable and also palpable. Like I felt more motivated that whole week after. I just felt confident and optimistic, and I wanted to put in those extra hours. I've always been okay with working longer hours if need be, but I find it stressful if I push myself too hard. If I do those extra 10 hours or whatever, I often feel it in terms of just feeling kind of overtaxed or I can even get a bit stressed or depressive if I really work those extra 10 hours more than kind of my comfortable average. But this week after that 1P-LSD, I did about 10 hours more than usual and also felt great the whole time and didn't have any kind of stress effects. So that was pretty remarkable. And it's an N of 1, so you can't be totally sure. Maybe it was partially placebo. You never really know, and your mileage might vary. So I can't guarantee this would work for other people, but I feel pretty confident, just based on my own kind of phenomenology, if you will, that it was a product or an effect of this particularly effective combination of 1P-LSD and a really pretty amazing flotation tank experience. So yeah, I don't know if this works for other people, but I'm definitely looking forward to trying this particular combination again because yeah, it elevated my mood for about a whole week at least and made me more productive. And I just felt really kind of ambitious and motivated and confident and inspired, and with very few downsides, I would say. There was no crash. I didn't feel low or anything the next day or even that evening or anything. And yeah, so it's really hard to think of any downside from a careful small microdose of 1P-LSD. At least in my one experience, there were no downsides. And it was a very mentally clear type of experience, with the one caveat that I was not really able to write very much of anything of interest. So that's my trip report. I hope some of you find this useful. Again, I'm not a real doctor. I'm just a PhD in social science. So this is not medical advice. Don't do anything illegal, or at least I'm not telling you to do anything illegal. And your other people's mileage might vary significantly, but this was my experience with 20 micrograms of 1P-LSD. I really enjoyed it.